would please silence or shut off your cell phones, we appreciate it. Today's a very good day. It's my honor today to welcome what we call our friend, Congressman Greg Walden. Some of the things that he's done for us, for Lake County, and the things he's done for our nation and for our state. The SRS payments for our road department, he's been supportive for pushing almost 20 years now, and reauthorization of those over the years. Active forest management and pro-forest work getting better for a healthy forest. Greg's always been a leader in that part of it. He's always been very supportive of our military. He's very honorable on that side of it. He will talk about this, but he has a big push for rural broadband. He's a leader in pushing for rural broadband. And so with that, it's my honor to introduce Congressman Greg Walden. I have a Lake County hat from the Board of Commissioners to present to him.
Oh, thank you. There you go.
No sunburn.
No sunburn. May not need it today out there either. Thank you. Thank you. Tell you what, I'm going to do that, and then can you hear me better in the back? All right, perfect. Well, thanks, Brad. I want to welcome you and Mr. Albertson and Mayor and everyone who is here today. This is my 21st town hall of the year. I've been around every county once. I was in Silver Lake earlier this year and kind of starting round 2, if you will. So we're glad to be back in Lake County. I've done 169 town halls since 2012 and as I said, 21st this time. It's a great way to hear from people and that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to give you a little update on some of the things we've been working on, but principally want to hear from you, get your input, take your questions and all of that. We hear from a lot of people, a lot of different ways. Facebook, Twitter, email, old style letters and envelopes with this thing called a postage stamp on it. People still do that a lot. In fact, we responded to 70,000, so far in the last 12 months, 70,000 phone calls, letters, and emails, including 390 out of Lake County, our record shows. So that's a lot of incoming, as you might imagine, but it's all appreciated. It's all very helpful. I want to thank Melanie Buzeni. Melanie, thank you for she in here somewhere. Okay, Melanie, thank you for your good work in helping make this facility available and all the setup. We really appreciate it. We, in addition to hearing from 70,000 people in the last 12 months, we've helped 300 Lake County residents over the years, including 80 veterans and 40 people with their Social Security or Medicare issues. So if you're here today because you have a personal case, let's say, with Medicare or the VA or something, we're happy to assist. I have several of my staff here. If I can't talk to you directly, or if you don't want to bring it up during the public meeting here, we're happy to talk to you in private about those sorts of things. We do a lot of that. Recently, we helped somebody with an IRS issue in Lake County and helped a better financing footing as opposed to the IRS just taking the money out of this person's account. And we were able to intercede and try to provide some help there. So if you've got a casework issue, happy to help, and you don't have to talk about it publicly if you don't want to. What I wanted to open up with is a little talk about some of the forestry legislation we've been working on. Brad referenced some of that we did get passed as part of the Farm Bill that will allow for more expedited treatment and more of our forest lands. As you all know, I've been a big advocate of that over the years. I'd like to see more of it be used for biomass, by the way, including that off our federal forest lands. What a concept. We fought this fight a lot. We have more to do. And I think you're seeing a growing effort in Congress on both sides of the aisle, both chambers, to clear up this distinction that somehow wood off of federal land is not useful for bio purposes, but it is if it's off private land or state land or any other forest land. A tree is a tree is a tree, and we should clean up the federal statutes so that it can be used for things like out at Red Rock and elsewhere. We also need to make sure that we move forward on reauthorizing the tax credit too for biofuels, biodiesel. There's a good market there. There's a good opportunity there. And we know we have plenty of material out there in the woods. We shouldn't have to make a distinction whether that material came off federal forest land, BLM land, or private, or whatever. We got to be able to use it. So we did pass legislation last year that will also put an end, starting in 2020, to what's called fire borrowing. This is something that has really offended a lot of us for a lot of years, both sides of the aisle. And that is where, when the Forest Service runs out of funds to fight fire, they have to use money from other accounts. A lot of that would be used to help reduce the fuel loads in the forest to pay for fighting fire. So they deplete those accounts, they stop the work, and then later Congress comes back, puts the money in the firefighting account and goes, oh, well, see, everything's fine. Well, it's not fine, because then that means the work isn't getting done because the money's being spent to fight fire rather than do the fuels reduction and other activities. So we worked together in a bipartisan way, got that fixed. It has budgetary implications, so it starts in 2020, but then it will be in law for the next 8 years, and hopefully eventually we can make that a permanent deal and treat fires in the forest like we treat tornadoes or hurricanes or floods or any other natural disaster, and not as something the agency has to eat along the way when it exceeds the firefighting costs that we budgeted for. We know that active forest management, I don't have to tell you in this room, but I'm going to, active forest management can reduce the size and intensity of wildfires by 70% and carbon emissions by 85%. So if you're concerned about carbon emissions, a great way to deal with it is locally, and that is through better forest management. And there's data that shows 75% of the carbon emissions occur after the fire as the dead wood decays. I would much prefer us be able to go in and remove the burned dead timber while it still has value, and we might call that, oh, that, or this, or this. That's sequestered carbon right here. It's not going to decay much more in any of our lifetimes. And so the legislation I'm proposing going forward would allow for that quicker access to burned dead trees where appropriate, still do environmental analysis, but we get it out while it still has value. And then you pay to replant the forest. This is something we tried to do in the legislation before. It fell out of the Senate. We're going to go back at it because I think we have an obligation to the next generation to replant after these fires and start the next forest. And we all know the impact of these fires. You suffered through it here. We certainly did in the Rogue Valley, Central Oregon, Klamath Basin, with all that smoke in virtually all of August. And we know from some hearings I held when I chaired the Energy and Commerce Committee, there's data that show 2,500 to 25,000 Americans die prematurely from wildfire smoke because you're inhaling it. And so you think about people with asthma or some other breathing disorder, it is really deadly. I had people send me pictures of their air filters. This was a gentleman in in Medford, I think it was, who sent me his CPAP, his breathing machine, night breathing machine filter, after 2 days, he said, in smoke in Jackson County. And so all that's going in your lungs if it doesn't stop at the filter. And there's some data that show, smoky as it was, it's like having your kids smoke a pack of cigarettes before they go off to school. It's that bad. And so we have to do more, both to get on these fires and put them out, stop the fire borrowing, remove the burned dead trees while they have value, and really try and get ahead of this and use the material in an economically viable way. In addition to the work we got done, we also reauthorized and increased funding for the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, which plays a key role in the Lakeview stewardship effort. The collaboratives are something I helped write a number of years ago and get into law, and I think we had the first 2 in the country were in this district, and the first one was here, and then there's a third one. And it really does make a difference, I think. It's another tool in the toolbox for active forest management. So more work to be done on forest management. We made some level of progress in the last Farm Bill. Wolves. So I hear a lot about wolves in our district and what they do to chase livestock around and cause problems. As you know, under the Obama administration, they decided the wolves had come back to a viable population and recommended that they be delisted, that they recovered. That was back in 2013. The Trump administration has moved forward with an effort then to delist and put the management under the states. And I know there's a meeting coming up in June to look at how Oregon would deal with that before the ODF&W, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I think that makes a lot more sense. These wolves are smart. Apparently they know where 395 is, so if they stay on one side, they're protected federally, and if they cross over, they're not. And I mean, this is silly. And so I'd like to see it get managed under Oregon's plan. It's not perfect, by the way, I understand that, but I think we have a better opportunity to work on better management at the state level than at the federal level. I know Governor Brown has pushed back recently on that, but I hope we can move forward. So that's important, I think, going as we work on things. Brad mentioned Rural Broadband. I used to chair the Telecommunications Subcommittee and then the Full Energy and Commerce Committee. And going clear back to 2012, we passed legislation to make more spectrum available so that from a wireless standpoint, these devices that most all of us have will work probably 100 times faster, more data on 5G than what you see now if it shows up as LTE, which at least on Verizon does here. So when you think about how we're all getting disconnected, if you will, from landlines and going to mobile devices, and most of the data we're looking at is mobile, we're getting the spectrum out that companies now have bought in auction, and that's benefited the taxpayers, the proceeds from that, and then they're beginning to build out a 5G network across Oregon and across the United States. In addition, we've passed some legislation to try and expedite the siting of fiber, because all that information and data that are flowing over the wireless networks eventually has to get to the backbone of the internet, and that's done through fiber. And so there's a lot of effort underway and funding looking at how we get communities, especially in rural areas, connected to higher speed broadband access. And the Federal Communications Commission is working on that. The Rural Utility Service, the Department of Agriculture, got $600 million, I think, last year to help around the country to build out broadband. And we passed the Access Broadband Act unanimously, which simplifies the process through which small businesses and local economic developments can access federal broadband resources. And so combined, there's a lot going on in that space, but we know that there's still 29 million Americans in rural areas who aren't connected. And that affects when you're trying to do telehealth. That's a problem when you're trying to, the kids are trying to do homework in this internet age. It's all across the map. And so that's something we continue to work on. A couple other issues on the healthcare side. There's a big bipartisan effort to deal with an issue that Oregon's addressed at a state level called surprise billing. This is where you follow all the rules and through your insurance company, and you go get some procedure done. It turns out some provider that showed up to assist, maybe it's the anesthesiologist, maybe it's somebody else, turns out they weren't in your network. And you get a surprise bill. Now, Oregon dealt with this. About 30 some states have not dealt with this yet. President's leading. I was down at the White House with the president and a bipartisan delegation to come up with a federal standard where everybody would be safeguarded. If you play by the rules, you follow what your insurer says you have to do, you shouldn't get stuck with these bills. And let me tell you how big they can be. There was a father there who's a doctor in the Midwest, and his daughter had a surgery. And on the way out, her doctor said, by the way, I want you to give a urine sample because we've got you on some pain meds and other things. We just want to check. So she did. And it turned out the lab was not in her, in her network. And she got a bill for over $175,000. That's right, $175,000. And so her dad and she were both at this news conference with the president, and the dad negotiated down. He was a doctor. He couldn't disclose what the final settlement was, but the president said, so how much should that have been? He said, in network, $100. It really is probably more like 25 now, but they fought it for years. And so, I mean, and he brought a copy of the bill, by the way. And so this is going on around the country. And so we're trying to say, if your state hasn't resolved this, we'll at least give a federal certainty here. And there are a couple of approaches to that going forward, but that's one we're taking up. We also are addressing the issue of high-cost pharmaceutical drugs. And the Energy and Commerce Committee, which I'm the top Republican on now, we passed out of that committee unanimously a couple pieces of legislation that will stop the pharmaceutical companies from gaming the system and delaying generic drugs from coming to market, and making sure that when the patents are running out, that they have to give samples to the generic manufacturers to spawn competition. So pay to delay and the other act, which will help get more generics into market. We know if you get generics into market, you get competition and prices go down. And so there are a couple of these bad behaviors we've identified that in a bipartisan way, we're moving forward on it. The CREATES Act, pay to delay, and some other things, the Blocking Act. Again, trying to get more competition into that space with the goal of driving down price. So these now passed out of the House, they're over in the Senate, and I think there's a good probability they will get to the President's desk, and if they do, he's indicated he will sign these bills into law. Now, last Congress, we modernized the entire Food and Drug Administration process for approving medical devices, new drugs, and generics. And as a result of that law change, the FDA last year approved more new generic drugs into the market in 1 year than in any time in its history. We also closed the Medicare Part D donut hole, which increases discounts for seniors on their Part D drugs. We are looking at a proposal that would cap out-of-pocket costs for seniors on Medicare Part D as well. But this got done already. We also took on the hearing aid device manufacturing world, and they had kind of a closed market, if you will, and we opened that up. So that's now law, to allow for people with mild or moderate hearing loss to literally save thousands of dollars. If you think about it, you know, I'm getting old enough, these are bifocals, right? So I gotta go to an optometrist, do all that stuff. Prior to that, I could get away with reading glasses. Think of this as hearing loss where you get away with over-the-counter hearing aids versus something where you've got to go get checked out. And they had closed the market for the over-the-counter part, and we opened it up. And so I think that's going to bring new technology into the market and provide a lot of savings as well. So a lot of stuff going on, but let me stop with that. I appreciate your turning out this afternoon. And I know we have, I think we put out the tickets, right? So we'll draw those, and we have a mic we're going to use. Oh, Nolan's got this all figured out. And I'll draw the first couple of tickets here, and then if you just come up and tell us who you are, the floor will be yours. So the last 4 digits on this were 4443. 4443. Now, if this was a door prize, you don't have to come up, but, whoops, oh, that didn't work well. Okay, no on 4443. All right, let's go to 4444. Perfect, and Caitlin's got the mic. Just say who you are, and the floor is yours.
Oh, I'm Dr. Alvin, and I'm permanent total disabled vet. My son is also a retired Navy, and he's retired disability. One of the issues he's been faced, don't put it right in my mouth, I have PTSD, that's not right.
He may want to just hold it too, Kate.
Yeah, yes, please. I've had good service from the VA on a lot of things, and in pointing to your hearing aid situation, I wear digital hearing aids.
Okay.
When the VA bought these for me, this is the first pair I've ever had from the VA, they paid $3,100 for it. My audiologist, before I went to the VA, his cost on one of them would have been $6,300.
Wow.
So VA is doing a great job of reducing costs, and your bill will help other people that don't have as severe a loss as I have. But that is also, my son has had 3 rejected appeals to the Defense Department, to the Navy, because they claim that his disabilities are not combat related, even though all of his doctors, his psychologists, everybody has said, and he was with the SEAL teams. He wasn't a SEAL, he was a Seabee. But they're claiming, because there's no record of this being overseas, that they deduct his VA from his military pension. And as you are aware, the law says that if it's combat related, he gets both. We've been going around now for 4 years on this, and we've gone through the senators and everybody, and it's not the VA, it's the Defense Department that is standing in the way of him getting what he's earned. So that's one of the things we need to look at when defense spending comes up. It's a pet peeve of mine that we can spend $1.5 trillion for an F-35 that won't fly yet, but we can't help veterans that need to get what they deserve.
So is part of this that he can't prove he was overseas?
His DD-214 doesn't have anything about his being overseas because it was all top secret.
Okay.
Everything he did with the SEAL teams for 5 years was top secret, so it's not in there. And they're claiming that he was never outside the wire. He was never inside. But those are the kind of issues that the public, I want the public to understand that more than anything else.
Yeah.
That when they blame VA for everything, it is not just the VA. It's most likely going to be the Defense Department, whether it's Army, Navy, Marine Corps. And it's very important. And so if you can do something, I know and I praised John at a meeting here one time.
Yeah.
And you know the reaction we got in that. He really appreciated your response back then, and I don't pause. But those are some of the key things that we need to look at.
Yeah, we run into this, as you've identified, and the handoff sometimes is really haphazard between DOD and VA. And we've had to get in the middle of a number of those over the years as well, especially with medical records, and then who has the I'll say the liability, and so anyway.
Yeah. But that's one of the main things. But
Okay.
just representing Eastern Oregon, I know I'm on the Wolf Committee, I'm participating in that. I'm a biologist, and so when we look at government, it's important that people realize. And one of the things that's going on, and I want to bring up because the VA and defense are part of it. But in all of our agencies, one of the things that people get upset about all the time in rural areas is we're underrepresented. We don't get Greg's done a pretty good job. I don't always agree with Greg, but he works hard to see that we get represented. And the thing is that with the press, with the current administration, there's so much misinformation about what the government really does, what the government is capable of. I'd like to see more coming out of some of your offices and that to explain the way things really work in the world. I'm a retired Fed, and it's unbelievable how ignorant the general public has been kept on what the government really does for people. And don't get offense, but I'm going to close with one of my favorite statements that I came up with about 25 years ago. And that is, federal employees go into the service like our Mr. Miller. They go into service for what they can do for people. And most politicians, don't get mad, go into it for what they can do to people. And it's for the people so many politicians represent, and the corporate world and so on. And so I would like to just say, when we live in a small community, we know most of our federal people around here, and we appreciate that they're part of our community. And I'd just like to see more of the country appreciate their federal employees, not just the veterans, but all the people that risk their lives. You mentioned fire. I've lost 4 friends in firefighting operations. And it's important for us to realize that all the people that are there to serve. And I hope you and other people in Congress will do more to reward us with some recognition.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and I appreciate that. It's part of why I kind of broke my party on reopening the BLM and Forest Service offices. I'm a big proponent of additional border security, and I think the wall makes a lot of sense, but I didn't understand why shutting down BLM and Forest Service offices in Old Lakeview and John Day and Vail and everywhere else had anything to do with the fight over border security, because that's a different appropriations bill and a different budget. And so I voted to support people who work in our communities and reopen these offices because I thought it was the right thing to do. I would also I take no offense, none issued. So it's the thing that always frustrates me is when we do get along and get things done, nobody wants to write about it. I'm not picking on the press. I'm a journalism major. I was in the radio business, but it's not as newsworthy as when we're fighting. And I think that gives a distorted view sometimes of Congress overall, because we actually do get along pretty well, and we do get a lot done. And so when we're not hitting each other, you never know about it, because it doesn't drive cable news ratings or something. So next up, 4448. You get all the 4444s done here. 4448, going once, going twice. I'm gonna tip that over. How about 4453? Well, there we go. Right there.
Hi, Congressman.
Speaking of biomass.
Speaking of biomass.
Nothing personal, I didn't mean that.
Yeah, Jim.
I really want to say I appreciate the bills, the recognition of federal biomass and stuff like that. That has been, you know how.
Yep.
And I appreciate the years with CFLRA doing, and now the extension to go to 25-year contracts as soon as the rules are finalized. I'm retired from LCRI, but I hear we're going after it. So,
Good.
yeah, we're going to go try. I understand that juniper is not being given credits because USDA classifies it as a bush and not a tree. That doesn't make, if that's true, that's what I've been told. We got a lot of juniper that needs removed, and
Yes,
there's a
we
lot
do.
of good works being done by the watershed councils
Yeah.
and the ranches to get rid of juniper. So if we could get that done, that'd be tremendous.
I know we've got some folks here in the Forest Service and all, but
We,
is juniper a bush or a tree?
I've always seen it regarded as a tree, and clearance, all the paperwork I've seen on EAs and stuff with BLM in the past, there's always, it's a tree.
This is a USDA requirement for the tax credits, is what I was told. Now, I could be wrong.
All right.
I'm not that aware of the current.
All right, we'll find out though. But yeah,
Yeah, we're looking, Jim, I think that maybe EPA is involved in that. We've got some folks that are going to be in conversations with Red Rock and EPA either this week or next week to try to straighten that out.
Okay,
so you think it's more an EPA issue?
That's my understanding. It's an EPA issue, and we're stepping up with Red Rock to have a discussion within the next week or two.
Will you make sure we're kept apprised of that? Because our committee has jurisdiction over the EPA, so I work with the administrator on a somewhat regular basis. So if we need to lean in on that, we're happy.
I believe Jeff Manarak made a public statement, and it was either in the paper or something, that they couldn't use juniper for those reasons. That's what I think I got.
Western juniper is in my tree book, so I'd be happy to send them a lot of
Oh, yeah.
I got a picture of you hugging one.
All right.
Thank you for all your work, Congressman.
Thanks, Jim.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, good to see you. And Nick, where'd Nick go?
Outside.
Oh, outside. He left. All right, 4442. We'll follow up too, but let us know. 4442.
I couldn't.
All right. 4441. Are we sure we put the? These aren't the ones for Merrill for tomorrow or for Saturday, are they? 4452. You're on.
Okay, that was my number, but you've already covered timber and some of the,
Yeah, my name's Judy Stewart. You've already covered some of the action that you've taken on getting some of this burned areas taken care of and trying to help mitigate the danger of forest fires. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
How about 4451? There we go in the back. Caitlin will bring it back to you there. Ah! Yes, just tell me who you are and we're happy to.
Thank you, Congressman. My name is Jan Wright. I live here in Lakeview. You brought up the border wall.
Yeah.
I marched in Washington last summer in front of White House protesting the separation of the kids from their parents.
Yep.
At the border. It's heartbreaking.
It
I don't
is.
even know who we are anymore. And I do want to ask a local question about housing.
Okay.
You know, we're getting another temporary workforce in with Red Rock. And rents are gonna go up, the workforce is gonna leave, and the rents are gonna remain high. This is just a problem for a lot of people. So if you could respond to that.
Yeah, and let me take both of them on. Because I led a bipartisan delegation down to the border last July. And we saw firsthand from literally from the Rio Grande all the way through our system. And I agree with you, the kids should never have been separated from their parents. It was bad policy, and I voted to stop it when we took up immigration reform legislation on the House floor last year. That legislation did not pass the House. It included more money for border security, it dealt with the DACA kids issue, and it would have prevented in law the separation of children from their parents. So I agree, and the President rescinded that at the end of the year, as I recall, if my timing is right, with an executive order. And we got a real problem on the border, and I do believe in border security. And I do think you have to have a secure border that in some places will be a physical wall, some places will be modern technology, but to be humane in how we work with people as they cross the border, we've got to have control. And a country that doesn't have control of its borders doesn't have control of its security. So I think that's important. Now I've forgotten the second. Housing. Well, I know the state of Oregon addressed this, the legislature, I'm not sure I agree with it, but put in rent control statewide. My fear is that two things could come out of that are unintended and adverse. One is they locked into statute, you can't raise rents more than landlords 7% plus inflation, which may actually be a ticket for landlords to raise them by 7% plus inflation every year, because that's now the number in statute. And you kind of hear that. The other piece is, with this new regulatory scheme in place, I hear from people that go, I'm not sure I'm going to invest in more rental housing in Oregon because of this. And so I worry about that other consequence. And so communities generally have tried to deal with this through the housing agencies. The federal government puts money into affordable housing through Section 8 and other programs to assist low-income people to be able to afford housing. And then the state steps in through the Housing Authority to do the same, and I know local communities are trying to address this as well. It is a problem from one end of our state to the other, frankly. It is in my hometown, the Hood River, which is about as far away from here as you can get, going north until you hit Washington. And we've been trying to address it there for years. And it is trying to get affordable housing for low to moderate income people. And every community is a little different in how they address it. We've looked at, are there cost drivers that cause housing to go up? And in terms of like the permit fees and some of that, when I've met with people who are in that business building houses, I've asked them, okay, why is it housing's going up? Some of it's material costs, some of it's permitting costs, and some of the limitation on land, the value of land. So it's a struggle I think every community's working on. And I don't know, I turn to the county commissioners or others in the city if you've got additional input.
I can speak a little bit to on the short term with the short-term jobs. They're looking at bringing in dorms the same as whenever Ruby was here. The RV places are trying to ramp up. So that will address some of the short term. The long term, look at it as an opportunity for investors to come into your community and build housing and do some development. I mean, think about an opportunity here as we need to grow. There's all different types of housing needed, affordable housing, transitional housing, and just regular housing needed here. So that's the way I look at it, Jim.
All right, thanks. 4447. Yes. Good afternoon.
Welcome back to Lakeview. I'm Gerald Stewart. You addressed a little bit about surprise billing, prescription drugs, but could you look into your crystal ball just a little bit about future of healthcare?
Yep. Yeah. Had I remained as chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the focus was going to be on cost of care from one end to the other of the spectrum. And because I think at the end of the day, a lot of Americans have insurance now, they just can't afford it, or afford to use it. The premiums are high, the deductibles are thousands of dollars in some cases. Now, there's all kinds of ranges in there, right? Some people are pretty subsidized, premiums are affordable, and you know, every policy is a little different. I run into a lot of people in our district who make just enough not to get subsidized, and they're paying the full boat, and I've had people say, I'm walking away. I had a couple in, I think it was Prairie City at a town hall say, we have just decided not to participate in insurance. We're gonna just roll the dice because it doesn't work for us. So we've got an issue with affordability of insurance. And then an issue on what things cost in healthcare. And I think we have to look stem to stern. So cost of drugs, that's part of it. The administration has leaned forward on this, and I would argue that no president in the time I've been in the Congress has done more to push forward to say to the pharmaceutical companies, you got to get your prices down, and then follow up with initiatives through the Health and Human Services rulemaking process. And Donald Trump's done that, and Alex Azar, Secretary of HHS, has done that with proposed rules to try and get at the middle piece of this, the PBMs, the pharmacy benefit managers, to take a big chunk out of the middle. Now they're supposed to be getting savings for consumers. If they are, I'd like to know where they're going, because it doesn't feel that way. And so what the administration's trying to do by rule is take some of that money, the rebates that are being taken out of the system, and actually get them clear down to the consumer at the pharmacy counter, okay? So that's one. We got rid of something, by the way, called a gag rule. I helped pass this legislation. A pharmacist in Grants Pass put me onto this one. She couldn't tell you when you came to get your drugs that if you just paid for it out of pocket, it would be cheaper than if you used your insurance. It's called the gag clause. And the insurers had this gag in place. So she couldn't tell you and not violate her contract. We got rid of that under federal law. They can't do that anymore. Because she said, I could save my customers a lot of money if I could just, if I could just tell them this is $100, not 175, if you pay it out of pocket versus through the insurance. And so we're trying to address these things. And I think there needs to be more price disclosure. Does anybody know what, now you would in this community, because there are too many alternatives to go get an MRI probably, or an X-ray. But in a lot of places, you could go to one of a number of different places and get an MRI, but what's it cost? It's not like a menu at a restaurant, or, look at how far we will drive to save 2 cents a gallon on gasoline, right? It's all posted. Tell me you know what anything costs in delivery health care. And so I think we need to do more of that price disclosure to drive competition and more informed consumers. Because we're paying more out of our pocket than we've ever paid in our lives. And I think that would then get competition into it. And so from one end to the other. Now let me tell you the good news. So you got all this pricing stuff and disclosure we need to work on. Here's the exciting news. You, through your tax dollars, and us through policy, have made enormous investments in medical research through the National Institutes of Health. And there are various researchers around the country, including up at OHSU and elsewhere. And Dr. Francis Collins heads that organization in Washington. He's the longest serving NIH director appointed by a president in the history of the country. I brought him in to do a roundtable with some of my colleagues the other morning. And these are the people, he's leading the organization with the best research minds in the world, looking at cures to cancer. You may have seen him on 60 Minutes a few weeks ago with sickle cell anemia. And they have figured out what letter is misspelled in your DNA code, and further, how to go in using a system called CRISPR to edit that letter and then reintroduce it into your system. And so sickle cell anemia that generally strikes African Americans more than anybody else, just because of the DNA sequencing, they can now, they believe, cure. And I mean, it is one thing, he said there are 6,500 diseases, genetic diseases, that they now have figured out the spelling errors on. Okay? So they now know, and with the CRISPR technology, they can go in and edit. And he said the only thing that stands in the way now is how to re-inject it into your system. And each one of these is going to be a little different, and they're not there yet, but at least they know they've broken the code, and they know how to fix it. So in our lifetimes, you're going to see these incredible cures that will be personalized medicine to your body. That they can get a cure to cancer, they can get a cure to these diseases. Now that's all the great news. Our system, how we pay for that, is not ready for that. And that's our challenge as policymakers, is how are we going to pay for a medicine that only applies to you, or to you, or to you, or to you. And we're going to have to work through that. Because these are going to come out, they're going to be very expensive. It might be $1 million per time prescription. But when you think of the cost of lifetime treatment of sickle cell anemia or one of these other diseases, you're going to spend far more than that. But still, how do you pay for it? And what's the right price? It's on patent. You want, they got to get their return. But we've got to figure out, from a public policy standpoint, how to address that. And there are various proposals out there. Some that the companies that develop these would have to guarantee that they work, and as claimed, over the long term, or they would have to pay back what they get paid. Some you'd basically be on a payment plan, like a lease, if you will, so you don't take the hit all at once. I don't know what the right answer is, because some of these are rare diseases that only affect a few people. So you don't want to dissuade them from coming up with a cure for that, because a lot of them fail. It's pretty expensive. So we have more work to do in that area. But I've met with parents who have kids with these extraordinary, debilitating, and oftentimes lethal diseases for whom there is now hope. And that's pretty exciting stuff. Now we just got to figure out payment stuff. The other piece on healthcare is the expansion of telehealth and telehealth services. So that if you're here in Lakeview, you can have the best healthcare experts anywhere, literally in the world, do a review if needed. We got to figure out how to make that work and how to pay for that. And the current laws on payment for telehealth aren't what they need to be. You got to have broadband too that's high speed enough. I mean, so there are several things here we've got more work to do on. But that holds great promise as well, to get world-class healthcare in every community in America. And so there's some exciting stuff, but there's some big challenges too in how we pay for it.
Thank you. On the cost, what's the chance of reinstating so that Medicare can negotiate prices on drugs the same way VA does?
Yeah, there's a big debate about that. When we wrote Medicare Part D, that was part of the debate. And at the time, the Congressional Budget Office came back and their report said it wouldn't save you. And if you look at the VA, the thing that happens there, it's a smaller population, and not all the new drugs are on that formulary. And so there are trade-offs. This is something we're looking at. Is there a way to put pressure on? What we want is consumers to get the best price possible. But certainly VA does do that. Some states do that. I think the president kind of leans that way. They're looking at an international pricing index to look at why are we subsidizing foreign country consumers in effect. And so they've got some ideas on that. So but that's just the drug piece. We've got from one end to the other to the healthcare spectrum what we got to look at. Oh, yeah, let me, 4446. 4456. Come on down. Caitlin's got to come on.
This is not local. I am wondering about the policy of our country in selling planes to Saudi Arabia. I don't think of Saudi Arabia as an ally. I don't think the prince is all he said he was about the journalist.
Yep.
And I was just wondering why we're looking at some of those countries.
Yeah, it's, I share your concern. It is a tangled web over there, and especially with Saudi Arabia. You know, the kingdom is big, it is wealthy, it is diverse, They fund the madrasas that inculcate young people into, I would argue, a more, shall I say, a terrorist sort of attitude that then comes back against their own regime. I mean, it is something else. But at times, while I agree, I don't look at Saudi Arabia as an ally. There are times when they are also very helpful to us and our cause in the Middle East. But the Middle East is a very contradictory place. I think that's probably about as polite as I can be on that. And Saudi Arabia has not exactly always been our ally and friend in some of the battles we've been in. But there are other times when they are a big asset. Now, when we sell planes or other equipment, we do not sell the best. I mean, they're airworthy, don't get me wrong there. But they are not necessarily, they do not have all the high technology that we reserve that for ourselves. And so I don't know all the data around what was just announced because we've been out of session since last Thursday. But I know that the president was moving forward, I believe, on a airplane sale basis to the Saudis. So I'm something we're going to be investigating.
Thank you.
Yep. 4455. 44. Oh, yep.
Couldn't read my number.
They're small.
I'm getting to that age. I'm Jesse Laird, and I'm a rancher from Plush, and I just wanted to thank you for your ongoing support of things dealing with our issues and what we face. There's a million things I could ask you about, and I'll probably talk to your staff about, and so on and so forth. But one of the one thing that might cut right to the quick, and I know we've talked about it before, is Equal Access to Justice Act reform. And I know that under the current political climate, that's probably not going to happen, probably not even on the radar. But I was wondering if maybe there might be a chance to get something through on transparency, because I would even think on the other side of the political aisle, there might be, you know, a desire for accountability in some of that stuff. And it might be a first step, but like I say, you know, some of these, a lot of our issues dealing with a lot of our federal lands issues are driven because of sue and settle and things like that that kind of are not totally upfront. So I just kind of want to.
So you'll be glad to know, I was just looking at I want to make sure I had this right. So earlier in the year, we actually passed into law the Open Book on Equal Access to Justice Act. I couldn't remember that title. And that requires the creation of a searchable online database of what was paid and who received it. So that, I think, is really important. So the Equal Access to Justice Act was actually passed during the Reagan administration, and it was you should have the right you should have the right to appeal a government decision, and if you win, you get your attorney's fees paid for. Sounds good. At the very end, they threw in nonprofits could do that as well. Well, that opened the gates then. And the long and the short of it is, some have used that as an ATM for their cause. And I had a forest supervisor years ago testify that they could win on 99 out of 100 points in a lawsuit. And because they lost on one, the judge would say, now you got to pay the attorney's fees, even though you basically won the case for the other side. You got to pay the attorney's fees. When we've had hearings on this issue in the Congress, I and others have said to agencies, how much do you pay out? And they don't know. You know why? Because they weren't keeping a record on it, or so they said. So it's your taxpayer money going out the door, and they can't tell you how much or to whom, and they don't keep track of it. This will begin that process. To your point, we should at least know. We can argue about how it works and all that, but at least as taxpayers, we should know, and as policymakers, we should be on top of this. And so we got that into law, which is a pretty big accomplishment. It's something I've supported for a long time. And I think it will begin at least to shine a light on the issue. And we'll know who's getting paid and how much. Because for some, The argument is it's become an ATM. And just sue and you get paid and keep going. And yeah, so good news, we made a little progress. 4449. Yes, sir. Kate will be right there with the microphone. Good afternoon.
Name is Don Lastly. I'd like to know your thoughts on cap and trade for Oregon and the gas price increases if it goes through.
Yeah, so on cap and trade, I'm not a full student of it because I'm doing work back in Washington D.C. So I'm not doing the legislative stuff, so I'm not up to speed totally on what they're proposing. What I have read gives me great pause. I would not be supportive of it because I think it has the potential to do real damage, especially in our rural areas, to our economy, to potentially our power rates and all of that. Look, there are ways we can, I think, through innovation and conservation, reduce emissions. We could start by reducing the size and scope of these wildfires. The IPCC UN climate panel report 2007 talked about how much. You look at wildfire emissions in California last year, 68 million tons of CO2. That's a year's worth of emissions from electricity, just from their wildfire emissions. And in Oregon, this was the last data we can find, 2015, it's the equivalent of 3.5 coal plants or 3 million cars. Now, we're not going to stop all fires, I get that, but we sure could do a lot more good out there by reducing fuel intensity, fuel loads, and put it to good use. And so I'm not a fan of these cap and trade policies. I think it also appears they're going to take the money then and redistribute it to who they think it should go to. And to me, that just speaks of misappropriation opportunities by politicians. And so I'm not a fan of that. And the second was the gas tax, I think you said.
Yes, Oregon is looking into that through cap and trade.
Yeah, so I don't know what their proposal is. Obviously, we have to pay for roads and bridges and things, and I get that as a user, and so, but I don't know in terms of how they're going to use it cap and trade wise. Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, Congressman, Lake County in 5 to 6 years, with all the development we have, we will have offset all our CO2 and methane emissions economically.
Yeah.
And if you add in, and that's good for a small county, but if you add in for the cities, the cross-laminated timber, we can now build 14-story buildings out of wood, and you add in biochar, and from a methane standpoint, it could be a feed supplement that will absorb methane. I think there's economic ways to do this. I wish somebody would talk about the economics of the way to do it.
And that's what we're trying to drive is through innovation. And this would be in that category of innovation. And of course, you're blessed to also have geothermal.
Yes.
Unless you're trying to drill a cold water well, that can be a problem for some people. But when you look at grid modernization, so we can take that power and get it where it needs to go. There's a lot of work being done. Mid-America is building, I think, one of the biggest transmission lines in the country right now from California into Utah, so they can take some of the surplus energy produced through renewables there when it's surplus and use it on across the grid. Hydropower, we passed legislation to streamline the siting for small-scale hydro. If you go up in central Oregon, they pipe some of the canals and have low-head hydro in those pipes. It produces power, hydropower obviously. It produces revenue for the irrigation district. It pressurized the water for the farmers, and it meant less leakage in the canals, so they're putting water into the streams. And so it works all the way around. You shouldn't have to go through the same permitting process for something like that as you do like one of the Hell's Canyon dams, right? So we're streamlining some of that. And so we had several bills to deal with that. There's really exciting work being done on advanced nuclear. Now I'm talking something that's probably twice the size of this table that'll produce a megawatt of power and power 1,000 homes. And you can bury it 10 feet in the ground, it's all dry, there's no liquid. The lab at Idaho Falls National Labs is working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day to produce the new fuel for that, and by a year or so from now, they'll have it. They plan to test it in 2021, I think they told me. That's one version. There's a company called NewScale out of Corvallis, been working on a small modular reactor. A little different technology, but there are 2 or 3 of these. Bill Gates has a third one, TerraPower. And so we think there's an opportunity there for nuclear power. Now, you think about a village in Alaska where they're now burning diesel for their electricity, and what you could do with a small modular dry reactor, in effect, and be done. And so when it comes to emissions, there's a lot of work being done there. And of course, we're continuing to look at transportation, where a lot of emissions come from. But I want America to lead in this sector and sell it to the world, our technology to the world. That's what we should do. That's what we do best. It's what we've always done on energy, by the way. And so I think there's a big opportunity, like you mentioned, to do more. 4439. Scoutmaster. Thanks again to you and your scouts for, do you have any eagles?
Yes, in fact, we're going to have a court of honor on Sunday for 4 eagles.
Hey, good.
And the 5th one is ready as well.
Excellent. I'm an old eagle.
Well, I want to kind of ask you a question along that lines. On a personal note, I heard you speak in the past and say that you are an Eagle Scout.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could tell us from your scouting experience, for the benefit of my boys here, what would be the one value or the one experience from scouting that maybe helped prepare you to be a leader or a congressman?
Trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. If you just follow that, or go, I think it's Cub Scouts, do a good turn daily. Yeah. And, you know, I tell people, you know, if you go into it with the sort of the scouting attitude of helping others and solving problems and kind of following the scout oath and the motto and everything, you don't go wrong. And the one I use and have used often is we were always taught to leave our campsite better than you find it, better than you found it. And I think in public service, that's what I've tried to keep at the front of my mind is, am I going to leave this place better than I found it? How do we solve problems? How do we fix things? And, you know, we don't always get it right. I mean, you make mistakes sometimes, and you look back and go, God, why did I do that? You know, I mean, it's just part of what happens in life. But the goal is always to leave it better than you found it. And when we go camping, I don't get time to do much of that. I'm still the guy that's looking around for, you know, little pieces of trash around the picnic table in the campground, you know, and putting it, I don't know, something I do, it's kind of weird, but you leave it better than you find it. So and being involved in the community and giving back. I think all that's really important stuff. So I'm glad you got that many eagles, that's terrific. Very few scouts ever become an eagle. And so the fact you stuck with it, to those who are about to get their eagle, well done. Did that answer it?
Yes, thank you.
4450.
I question, personal question.
Sure.
And I want to read you a sentence out of the...
Let us get you the mic. Are you 4450?
Yes.
Okay, guys, tell me your name if you would.
Okay, I'm sorry. Ronaldo Gonzalez from Lakeview.
Very good.
And I'm going to read you...
the Mueller report.
The Mueller report. You can buy it.
Or you can download it online.
You can buy it, it's only $9 for $8.50, something like that.
Free online.
Anyways,
Postage got it.
but then I'm going to ask you a question.
All right.
I'm going to read a sentence.
Hold the mic though up so they can...
Okay, I'm sorry.
There you
It's
go.
in the introduction of Volume 1. It says the Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systematic fashion, period.
Yes.
What I'd like to ask you is there anything personally that you plan to do to prevent such interference in the 2020 election and in the 2020 mid-year election?
Yeah, there are a couple of things, and I appreciate you raising that, because the Russians not only were involved in our elections, They get involved in most democratic elections. In France, they were involved there. I mean, all over the world, they have their propaganda. RT TV, Russian television. Anybody seen that on cable, whatever? Yeah. You realize that's paid for by the propaganda outfit of the Russian government. It's part of their propaganda machine. And it's available. I mean, people are watching it. We saw it on RT. It is literally part of their propaganda effort. Now, we have First Amendment. I get that, but people ought to know. RT, Russian television. Who knew? It's the Russians. And so that's a problem. Facebook. I've met with Mark Zuckerberg. I had him testify before our committee for 5 hours a year or so ago. I met with Sheryl Sandberg a few months ago, and we talked about this because, you know, they use the Facebook platform in part. All these fake accounts, all the ads. The ads were, I think they spent $100 grand on ads. I don't think that swayed the election, by the way. Or if it, I told Ms. Sandberg, I said, if $100 grand of Facebook ads swings the presidential election, then you're not charging enough. But they're now going back and doing better due diligence to figure out fake accounts and false information. That's a big challenge for a big platform like that, and we can all identify some things that are false, but we're asking them to do even more than that sometimes, and now you start to get into your First Amendment rights, right? Because they may, because we disagree with somebody to have them take it down? It's a big issue. But I think more disclosure is good. And I think, obviously, these social media platforms have a big responsibility, whether it's Google, and I've talked to them about it, or Twitter. We had the CEO of Twitter before the committee. Similar sort of discussion among other issues. And they're the big platforms where the Russians play. They're not using direct mail necessarily, but they're going to use every bit of KGB tactics possible. And it's not just the elections. They are also identified as being involved in trying to affect other public policy, and if you read further in the Mueller report, you'll see where they created these fake things. Not Black Lives Matter, but it's something similar to that. I'll get the title wrong. And then what they were trying to do, they had the right and the left represented, and then they would get them to fight each other, and then they'd step back. They would create rallies, it's in the Mueller report too, and then all from afar, and then step back and say, oh, I can't be there, can you go ahead and lead it? And they'd con people into doing that. And some of them were pro-Trump rallies, some of them were sort of on the Black Lives Matter, some of them were on the other side of that. They want to sow seeds of discord and pit Americans against each other and have us lose faith in our basic democratic principles. And so we have to be on guard against that as well. They want to sow disruption in our country. It's part of their MO. By the way, we believe they're doing it on 5G, the rollout of this high technology, because they want to lead on it. And that's something our Oversight Investigations Committee is going to look at. The New York Times did a piece on this recently about the Russians putting out propaganda that 5G is going to create cancer. And there were these stickers that showed up in Portland recently on lampposts where they're going to attach these saying health hazard. They looked official. And the Oregonian did an investigation and found out that they were not official. I'm not saying they're Russian, but the Oregonian said, go read the New York Times piece, because they're going after 5G. Meanwhile, I'm told in Russia, their propaganda is 5G will cure cancer. So, I mean, they're just bad actors. And so, yeah, I don't want any country involved in our politics.
It'd be nice if it worked the other way, too.
Well, we have been known to occasionally try and influence a foreign election ourselves, let's just be honest, right?
One thing we haven't heard is anything about any legislation being proposed by the Congress or the Senate. Maybe it's going on, but
yeah, there's some. But it's so what do you think would be most effective? You've read the Mueller report. What in this regard? What do you think we need help on this?
Well, you know, I'd have to do some more research. I can't.
Yeah. Because I know there's effort to require I know, at least on Facebook, they're going to do more to make people prove they are who they are and disclose who's paying for whatever in terms of the advertising. So they're doing more to try and identify this. I read recently where they deleted another enormous number of fake accounts that people are setting up. But remember, as soon as they delete one, there are 8 more probably get set up. So they're using AI to try and stay ahead of it or get ahead of it. But it's a new day in terms of trying to combat this stuff. So we really do need ideas on how to go after it. But there's, first you got to identify what the problem was. And we've done that. And then the individual companies are trying to ratchet it way down and stop it. And then we're looking at legislation that requires further disclosure on ads. Senator Wyden's had a bill in to do that, which I think would be good. Yeah, so there's work on it, but it's a tough one. Because we also live in a country with First Amendment rights of speech under the First Amendment. So then you got to sort out, is that a Russian actually behind that ad or Facebook or whatever? Especially in the online world, it's hard to identify who really is it. There are lots of bots out there.
Thank you.
Let's see, 4454. Ha. Good afternoon.
Hi, my name's Lisa Ackerman. Kind of a follow-up with Orlando's question, that's what I was thinking about. Doesn't the interference of a foreign entity into our voting process or systems bleed over into a national security issue?
Yes. And by the way, Mueller's effort resulted in the indictments of a number of Russian actors, I'll call it, because most of what they did is already illegal under federal law. And so they have named them and indicted them. And if you get into the reporting, see, I mean, one of my takeaways was we have pretty good intelligence ourselves, because they went clear back through the system and figured out what unit of the Russian propaganda machine was behind this and who the names are, and indicted them. And so on some of these things that already under federal law, foreign influence in elections illegal. So they are going after it. All right, we got time. You know, I have 2 tickets left. So we will have called everyone. 4445 and 4440.
Bingo!
You won! You know if you waited long enough.
Oh, I don't think I'll need that. Mark Williams here from Lakeview, and
Yeah.
I just have a concern, and it grates on me something like you can't imagine. And that is we have a number of agencies under the federal government. Some of them issue regulations.
Yes.
And sometimes those regulations include punitive action. If you do not abide by the regulation, you're subject to fine or imprisonment.
Right.
And I feel that such regulation should go through both houses of Congress. This is not up to an individual agency to do that.
Yeah, so generally, and I'll just say generally speaking, that's occurred first. And it is the Congress will pass a law, or the state will pass a law, and say such and such is against the law, and then Congress will delegate its authority to the agency to write the rules to implement that. And usually on fines, there's a cap put in place that you can be fined up to X, and then leave it to the agency to figure out how to do it. Now, Congress and state legislatures do too much of that delegation to the agencies, I think. When things are especially hard to figure out, too often Congress will say, we can't figure it out, so here, we're going to give it to the agency, you figure it out. Oh, by the way, when we get it wrong, then we're going to drag you up and criticize you for getting it wrong, even though we couldn't figure it out to begin with. And so we need to be, as lawmakers, more prescriptive when we write laws. And I've always felt that once you've done a big law, you should go back and see, did it work? And if it didn't, what needs to be fixed? We took on the opioid crisis under my chairmanship at Energy and Commerce, passed 60 different pieces of legislation into laws as one big bill. And I've recommended to the gentleman who replaced me as chairman that we need to go back this Congress and do a hearing and find out is it working or not. And what else do we need to do? And what do we get right and what do we get wrong? So it's kind of what you're saying is Congress needs to be more engaged in setting these specifics in whether it's fines or fees or whatever, and we need to review it. Now we have something called the Congressional Review Act, and we used it a number of times in 2017, where you can look back 6 months on an agency's rules, and Congress, in a privileged way, which means it can't be filibustered in the Senate and it has to be brought up, can repeal a rule. And we did that on a number of rules in 2017. And we did it one other time back in 2001, I believe. But it's not used very often. But what I've seen over the years is a delegation of authority without proper parameters, and then agencies go and write rules, and then we complain about it.
Well, my problem is, I understand, you know, the Congress has a lot of things on its plate, but I don't see anything in Article 1 that says that Congress can delegate authority to an agency. That Congress has the power to make laws, not agencies.
The administration writes regs.
Yeah, that's right. Through the Administrative Procedures Act, a law written by Congress, we gave the agencies an opportunity to implement those laws. Now, again, I would say the less we delegate to the agencies, the better, because that means we do the work as your elected representatives and write that law and leave little discretion. But sometimes the agencies have better expertise in these areas, depends upon the policy, than necessarily we do. And you want to give them some flexibility to implement the law, so it makes sense. If the issue is they run away with fines and fees, that needs to, I fully agree that there need to be realistic limits on that. Usually those get couched in terms of we're going to make polluters pay. And so we're going to set $1 million fine, and the next thing you know, for some minor offense, that's the new minimum, not the maximum. And I've seen that over the years happen. And so I really think you've got to get back to where it's, there's a better check and balance on runaway rules. Now, this administration, they have set as a goal rolling back 2 rules for every 1 that gets written. And they far exceeded that. And so you're seeing fewer and fewer rules get written, and they're actually repealing old rules, some of which are simply outdated, been on the books forever and made no sense. But they have to go through a process to do that as well, to repeal a rule, and they're doing it.
A large percentage of regulations are actually changing prior regulations. When you go through, the public announcement, quote unquote, that nobody ever sees, that when you go through those announcements of the regulations, it's amazing how many are actually revising regulations. They're not new regulations. Everybody thinks everything's a new regulation, and about 50% are not. They're changing prior regulations.
Yeah. And so I think they're at like 60-to-1 repeal. So they're repealing writing a new regulation to repeal an old regulation, because you got to write a regulation to repeal. You got to make the case too. I mean, there's a whole process they have to go through to repeal a rule. So, yes, sir.
Congressman, my name is Charlie Twait. I'm with the hospital.
Yes, you are.
I got here too late to get a ticket. I just want to say something. First off, I want to thank you for your support of the critical access hospital positions and how vital that is for our community.
You got it.
And I think that your comment about people not knowing what the price of things, I just want to point out and make sure that the public understands that in the state of Oregon, all hospitals publish what everything costs. So the cost of an MRI, on our website, you can find out what it is. I don't know off the top of my head, but we all publish that. What does get to be difficult,
that's right,
for the general public is to know when, if your doctor orders an MRI, do you want to go shopping? How do you know the reading of that, or is the quality of that? And so it varies. So it isn't just the pricing. Oftentimes it is a compilation of things that go into that, but it's also what really impacts us in our remote communities, is access to care.
Yep.
And telehealth is a very big part if we had good broadband.
Exactly.
And there are a lot of things if we had. I thank you very much for what you do.
Yeah, thanks. Because that is, we talked about broadband, I don't know if you were, I think you were here by then, but, because that is, yeah, you can have all these great tools, you just, watch the things spin around and around and around and around and around and around, and reach them all. We did do some, good reminder, last Congress, under my leadership in the Energy and Commerce Committee, we extended the Children's Health Insurance Program for 10 years. It had never been funded for more than 5. Fully funded, 10 years. There were about 123,000 kids in Oregon get their insurance and care through CHIP. Community health centers, we've got 12 in Oregon, 63 locations in the district. They help 240,000 patients throughout our district. We fully funded those at record level for 2 years. We've got to do it again. We're in the cycle right now to do it again. Special diabetes program, and there's another one called the Indian diabetes programs. We funded both of those. National Health Service Corps, which helps get healthcare providers into unserved and underserved areas. And we funded that as well. And the Maternal Infant Childhood Home Visiting Program, helping at-risk mothers get some counseling. We did that one. We did some other, do you have the other? Or I guess that was it. I thought maybe it was a 2-pager. So we did get a lot done. There's a lot more to do going forward. Oh yeah, we did do all that, didn't we? Yeah, Medicare therapy cap. So I would hear from people about, at some point you would face this cap. Now Congress would continue to put this off, but it was kind of a cliff every year. We had to put it off. We finally got rid of it. And what this is your physical therapist tells you you need 10 whatever sessions, and you may get cut off at 8 because there was a cap. We got rid of the cap, so actually your provider can now have more leeway to make sure you get what you need. And then we did some work on reimbursement payments for rural ambulance services and rural home health payments as well, which in Oregon is, I think, hugely helpful, and in our rural communities, I've been a real fighter for rural home health, and so, yeah. Well, yeah, one more.
Since you're talking about health, I have had several constituents that had mental health problems. Mm-hmm. And Medicare doesn't pay for a lot of the mental health needs. And so what's happened is they were in the hospital, needed to go to a higher level of care somewhere else, but the other places wouldn't take them because they were on Medicare. Is there something we can do there?
Yeah, we're trying to expand access for people that need mental health services, not just those on Medicare, but across the board. About 3 years ago, we rewrote all the mental health laws in the country. That hadn't been done since actually John Kennedy. The last bill he signed into law before he was tragically assassinated was the mental health law. And we've added programs over time, and nobody had ever gone back and said, does this work or not? This program, that program. So we did a complete rewrite of all those programs and put in place some parameters to evaluate effectiveness of the ones that got extended. And then we put more money into it, try to get money into the communities to have mental health services. And that funding now is flowing at least out of Washington. It takes a year or so to get that going into the communities. We did more through the opioids legislation we passed to provide substance abuse disorder assistance as well. There's often a comorbidity there. I don't know, Alex, do you know Nolan on Medicare?
Well, a big issue is Medicare telehealth reimbursement, specifically for mental health care. That's a huge barrier. We've, with Greg's leadership, really cracked open some reimbursement for Medicare telehealth on mental health, specifically telemental health or telepsych. But there's a long way to go, and there are some site of service requirements that we like to break down.
I know, like on our veterans, if we could do the telehealth, mental health, we'd have a lot better outcomes because they don't want to necessarily go to a mental health facility where they can be in their own home or come down here to the VA and do their counseling right over the internet, and then we're back to the
And I believe this is correct. The data show that, especially on mental health services, telehealth actually works pretty well. Now, some people are more comfortable with that than not. We have had providers tell us actually some people are more comfortable doing it that way. And so that's something we're continuing to work on. But it gets back, you've got to have connectivity, you've got to have broadband to make it all work. Can't have latency.
Another question I had, going back to Jesse's comment on that act, I can't remember, what's the name of that?
Equal access to justice.
Which is the wheelchair act, correct?
That's
No.
what's, it's called
Not
the
the wheelchair.
Well, don't they, I've heard it referred to as the Wheelchair Act, maybe it's not, like accessing federal buildings.
That's
where.
ADA.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
I was
anyway,
thinking on that.
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
nonprofit.
Americans with Disabilities Act is what is about accessing buildings.
So anyways, this act allows nonprofits to be refunded for their lawyer fees.
That's equal access to justice.
Right. And so the problem is that a lot of these groups are suing the Forest Service or the BLM, and we have it happen right here in Lake County.
Yeah.
And then part of the agreement also was that on this specific one with the BLM, that they could, part of the litigation is they could, if a rancher voluntarily allows these grazing rights to go back to the BLM, it could never be renewed as part of the litigation. Well, I found in the last week, there's a ranch that's buying property, and it's not really a ranch at all. And it's funded by the group that sued them. And what they're doing is buying land and then
retiring the grazing permits.
And so I have the name of that, Jess, and I'll give it to you, but I don't want to say it publicly until I get more information. But they bought 12 properties already in Lake County, and I have some investigation to do on that.
All right.
But this kind of manipulation kind of leaves us always fighting defensively. And, you know, we're calling out for help. And the only way that this could be stopped is to stop them financially.
That's right.
And the only way I could see that we could stop them financially is by cutting the head off the snake and not allowing them to sue the government or to be refunded for their lawyers. You know, if you have a legitimate case, great, but it stops our forests from being healthy, it stops our ranchers from being out and being able to conduct business like we have for over 100 years. You know, and we've, you know, there's this big push on diversity and we're supposed to accept this and that, but they want to take away our culture and our Western heritage, but they don't look at it the same way. I mean, our culture is being taken away, and I'm getting a little fired up, so I'll let her go.
No, so this is something we've been working on for quite a while. And so the bill I talked about early on, the open book on the Equal Access to Justice Act, finally will at least make the government disclose who are these groups of individuals and how much are you paying them as a taxpayer. And I think disclosure is a good thing. Sunshine is a good thing, and we ought to know. And so that's now law. There are proposals out there, some of which I've supported, that would cap the attorney's fees, you know, and put a limit. There's a proposal to limit the number of times any one group could sue in a given year, because, you know, one of the arguments is it basically sets up a system where they can never lose, and they always get paid, because there's always something, given the complexity of the land management rules and laws, where they're probably going to win on a point. And then you'll get a sympathetic judge that says, okay, you got to pay all their fees. And so that's where we need to do more reform, and I'm all about it. But the first thing it shouldn't be that. You shouldn't have to pass a law to require these agencies to keep track and disclose who's getting paid and how much. But we had to, and I'm glad we got it done. I'm actually a little surprised, given the new makeup of the House. At least we got it into law, but I'm glad we got it done. And then we have a better factual basis for the next argument, which is, what's the impact of this? When we rewrote when we wrote the Healthy Forest Restoration Act, it was in part to change some of this, so that because we were finding the Government Accountability Office did an investigation and found how many of these projects that then around communities were being sued upon and slowed down or stopped, and then how many actually ended up burning because you didn't get in there, all that. And so we changed up the process so that the agencies had a little more flexibility. We created the wildfire community planning process so communities could come together and identify areas as a broad sense of community that needed attention. And then if it was within the wildland-urban interface, and you had the community wildfire planning process, then the agencies only had to come up with an action or no action alternative, not 4 or 5 of them. And if people objected, they could do that, but they had to have participated in the process. And you didn't have to start the whole loop over again. They could make an adjustment, as I recall. And then we did something which I think is really important called the balance of harms. And so on these projects under HFRA, the judge now has the authority to look at the balance. So what does that mean? In the past, you get one of these lawsuits and they'd say, well, judge, you got to block this because you can't uncut that tree. Once it's cut, it's gone. And my view was you also can't unbug infect it. You can't do these other things. Forests are not static. And so the judge could balance then the harm of not acting, not thinning, what that could mean to a community. Take Paradise or take Crooked River Ranch or somewhere. If we don't get in there and manage. So we got that into law. I'd like to see that expanded. And it'd be great if we get away from all this litigation that costs everything, and get to a more collaborative process, which is what we're trying to do in the collaborative. And that works in some areas better than others. But the Equal Access to Justice Act, you're shelling out a lot of money. We don't even know to whom or how much.
And not only that, a whole lot of time.
Oh yeah, and delay.
Just like the Berry Point fire, that timber was sold, and they stopped us from cutting it. They should be liable for that.
Well, there are some proposals that would have these individuals or organizations have skin in the game with a bond. And so if they lose, then they got to pay. I mean, if you had a losers pay law in America, like some countries have, you'd have a lot less frivolous litigation. Now there are all kinds of arguments around that, but in many foreign countries, you want to talk about defensive medicine. In a lot of these countries, they get cited as having low overhead costs. They also have a loser pay or no liability provision as well. So you don't get into defensive medicine and these big settlements. Now, how you resolve malpractice is something we're all concerned about, but there are more issues to work on. Well, I want to thank you all for coming out this afternoon. I want to thank the county and for letting us use this facility again, and I really appreciate it. And I know we have agreements, we have differences. I think we can all agree we live in the best country on the planet, and it's up to us to leave it better than we found it. And we can all be Eagle Scouts. Thank you.